Let's just dive right into this. Think about that profound, incredibly comforting feeling of finally finding your people, your tribe, right? Whether we're talking about a tight-knit corporate team, a passionate online fandom you've joined, or a deeply held political community, there is honestly nothing quite like the warmth of belonging. It's a fundamental, universal human desire to want to fit in somewhere. But today we are going to look at the exact neurobiology behind that warm feeling. Drawing heavily on the rigorous, eye-opening research of neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky, we're going to completely strip away the generic sociology. We aren't just talking about peer pressure here. We are looking directly at the cold, hard mechanics of the brain. Because, as you'll see, right beneath that incredibly warm feeling of inclusion, there is a literal biological trap just waiting to spring.
I want you to take a moment and just let this question really sink in. What is the biological cost of feeling included? We almost always view finding our in-group as this purely positive, pro-social achievement. It's the goal, right? But the thing is, biology operates entirely on a system of trade-offs. The exact same neurochemistry that bonds you so fiercely to us has a deeply unsettling, entirely mechanical way of processing them. So in today's explainer, we are focusing entirely on the unseen neurobiology operating right beneath our deepest social bonds.
Section 1. The millisecond divide. How the brain sorts the world before we can think.
Okay, so Sapolsky's data on this is absolutely striking. It details exactly how the human brain biologically partitions the entire world into us versus them long before a single conscious thought is even formed in your prefrontal cortex. Now, we really like to think of prejudice or bias as a learned cognitive choice, a societal flaw, but the biological data shows us it actually begins as a raw, automatic neurological reflex. I really want to anchor us on this clinical number here, 50 milliseconds. That is less than a tenth of a second. It's literally faster than the blink of an eye. According to the research, if you flash a face of someone from an outgroup, say someone of a different race, for just 50 milliseconds, it is physically too fast for the viewer to even consciously register that they saw a human face. Yet, in that incredibly tiny subliminal window, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, is already activating. It's firing. It is reacting defensively to an outgroup face before your eyes have even had the chance to communicate to your conscious mind what they're looking at. No thought, just an immediate defensive reflex.
And this brilliantly and kind of terrifyingly illustrates the mechanics of that reflex. Notice the really sharp contrast going on inside your skull. On one side, we have the amygdala spiking, and that's entirely driven by fear, threat, and vigilance. But on the other side, we have something called the fusiform face area. Now, this is the part of the cortex that specializes in facial recognition. You can think of it as the part of the brain that quite literally recognizes humanity. When we look at someone from our own group, our us, this fusiform face area lights up brightly. It sees a person. But when looking at an outgroup member, the amygdala spikes, and the fusiform face area is clinically suppressed. I really want you to let that reality sit with you for a second. Our brains literally, biologically process them as having less of a human face.
Sapolsky vividly refers to these as the brain's fault lines. And these deeply ingrained neurological divides operate entirely below our conscious awareness, naturally favoring the in-group at the absolute expense of outsiders. So what happens is, our conscious mind, our prefrontal cortex, is essentially just running to catch up with our biology. We experience this biological flash of fear or disgust in milliseconds, and then our cognitive brain scrambles to invent a rationalization for why we don't like those people. We build arguments, politics, and philosophies around it. But the truth? The truth is the fault line was already drawn in the dark, in the span of 50 milliseconds.
Section 2. The oxytocin myth. The assassination of the love hormone.
So, you might be wondering, if fear and division are wired that deeply into us, what about love? Surely biology gives us something for that, right? Well, you've very likely heard of oxytocin. It is endlessly marketed to us in pop psychology as the cuddle hormone, the universal chemical of peace, empathy, and human connection. But Sapolsky famously calls this the Teflon presidency of oxytocin. Because as a society, we desperately, deeply want to believe that this chemical simply makes us more trusting, empathic, and cooperative toward all of humanity. I mean, it sounds beautiful, doesn't it? The idea that we could just pump oxytocin into the water supply and we'd all suddenly love each other and end war forever. But that's a complete myth. Hormones do not invent behaviors in a vacuum. Their effects are completely, 100%, contingent on context. And the cold biological context of oxytocin is strictly limited to the boundaries of your specific tribe. Let's systematically tear down this pop psychology myth right now by walking through this clinical comparison. The popular myth tells us that oxytocin creates universal trust and connection. The biological reality, it creates parochial, in-group favoritism. Full stop. The myth tells us it causes unconditional generosity. But the actual biological data reveals something much darker. It actively fuels preemptive aggression toward anyone defined as them. And while the myth claims it gives us empathy for all, the reality is that oxytocin literally enhances gloating when outsiders suffer bad luck, and it increases envy when those outsiders succeed. Simply put, oxytocin is absolutely not a universal love hormone. It is an us hormone.
So, the absolutely crucial concept to grasp here is parochial altruism. This is the exact observed biological mechanism of oxytocin, and it proves that oxytocin is actually a parochial weapon. Yes, absolutely, it intensely warms our feelings for us. It makes us significantly more cooperative, more generous, and much more willing to sacrifice for our teammates or our family. But, and this is the catch, it does this while simultaneously and actively chilling our empathy for them. It's a seesaw. The stronger the love and connection inside the wall, the higher the baseline hostility toward those stuck on the outside.
Section 3. The biology of hostility. Weaponizing belonging.
To really understand this biology of hostility, let's look at some deeply striking behavioral experiments conducted by researcher Karsten de Droo over in the Netherlands. These studies totally expose the dark, weaponized side of this neurological chemistry when it's actually put to the test. We can walk through this classic prisoner's dilemma study step by step. Step 1, the researchers take ordinary subjects and divide them into totally arbitrary teams, meaningless groups. Step 2, they introduce high financial stakes to make the game actually matter to the players. Step 3, they administer a literal dose of oxytocin to the subjects. Now think about it. If oxytocin was the universal love and hugging drug, step 4 should be a beautiful display of peace and cooperation across the board, right? Instead, step 4 shows a massive, measurable surge in preemptive backstabbing against the opposing team. The exact hormone that bonded the team together internally actively spiked their preemptive attacks against the outgroup. Because they loved their team so much, they ruthlessly attacked the other.
And, it gets even more chilling when this is applied to human morality. In a classic trolley problem experiment, subjects were asked the standard ethical question, is it acceptable to sacrifice one person to save 5? But the researchers added a twist. They gave the potential victims names. For the Dutch subjects participating in the study, some of the names were stereotypically Dutch, like Dirk and Peter, classic in-group names. Others were German, like Marcus, or Middle Eastern, like Ahmed, out-group names. When the subjects were given oxytocin, again the supposed love hormone, they became far, far less likely to sacrifice good old Dirk or Peter. But they became highly willing to sacrifice Marcus or Ahmed. The oxytocin didn't make them universally loving, it actively amplified their ethnocentrism.
Which brings us to this stark, undeniable summary. The dark side of oxytocin is that it heightens ethnocentrism, it amplifies xenophobia, it increases outgroup prejudice, and it actively fuels preemptive strikes. It is incredibly vital to understand that this is not a glitch in the system. It's not an aberration. It is the exact same neurochemistry wiring us for love, loyalty, and maternal care that simultaneously wires us for targeted, preemptive hostility. From a purely biological standpoint, you literally cannot separate the warmth of the in-group from the freezing out of the out-group. They are two sides of the exact same chemical coin.
Section 4. Modern echo chambers. The Trojan horse of our time.
Now, let's bring this all the way home and apply this biological reality directly to your world right now. Because we don't live in ancient tribal savannas anymore, do we? Our tribes today are modern echo chambers. Think about a corporate culture that constantly and aggressively refers to itself as a family. Or think about highly toxic online fandoms or rigid ideological camps on social media. These modern structures are the Trojan horses of our time because they offer us that incredibly seductive, deeply warm feeling of belonging. But underneath, they are hacking our ancient biology. When you enter one of these echo chambers, you are instantly rewarded with a massive surge of connection and oxytocin. But remember the definition of ethnocentrism, evaluating absolutely everyone else solely by your group's standards. When an ideological echo chamber makes you feel intensely warm and included, it is simultaneously chemically rewriting your brain to dehumanize anyone outside that wall.
Your amygdala is literally being trained to fire at outsiders. Your fusiform face area is being trained to see them as less human. Your baseline empathy is being systematically and biologically narrowed. And this brings us to a final, really stark contrast. On the one hand, we have this comforting societal illusion of finding your tribe. It feels amazing, it feels morally righteous to stand with your people. But on the other hand, we have the cold, clinical, biological suppression of our shared humanity. The ultimate tragedy of our biology is that the closer we pull our own people in, the more intensely our brains prepare to push everyone else away, very often justifying truly terrible actions, all in the name of in-group loyalty. Which leaves us with this final thought, something I want you to deeply, slowly reflect on after we wrap up here. Are the walls of your echo chamber biologically blinding you to your own empathy? The next time you feel that absolute comforting rush of being entirely aligned with your group, stop and ask yourself, what is costing you neurologically? Who is your brain quietly learning to stop seeing as human? Because the cost of belonging is exceptionally high. And until we recognize the cold mechanics of us versus them operating right there in our own minds, we are, quite simply, at the mercy of our biology.